It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. If you're new to the channel, I'm a mixed martial arts coach here in the city of Shanghai. I coach cage fighters. I have for a very long time. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to answer in rapid-fire fashion a list of questions from Quora.com, a website where people submit questions and ask for answers. So before we get into it, shout out to my sponsor, xmartial.com. They make fine rash guards like this one and other training equipment for martial arts. Go check them out. Link and a discount code in the description below. On with the video. First question. Would Bruce Lee at his peak be able to contend with today's top MMA fighters? No. Easy question right there. Who is the best MMA fighter? That's highly debatable. Next question. Which one is better, boxing or MMA? Better for what? We need to clarify that question. Next question. What is the most effective martial art or fighting technique for mixed martial arts? If you only have one technique, you are dead in the water. That's silly. Mixed martial arts is integrated combat. It is a hybrid sport of striking and grappling. And if you've got one technique, you're gonna die. Next question. Could an MMA fighter defeat a chimpanzee in hand-to-hand combat? No. Chimps are dangerous animals. I know they look little and cute. Unless you've actually taken a good look at a full-grown male chimpanzee, those things are scary and they're extremely strong. They could tear your head off. Man, I remember seeing a documentary about chimpanzees and they're hunting a gazelle or some sort of hooved animal, and they jump on it from the trees, and one of them grabs it by the head and with a single hand pulls the head right off of this thing. Yeah, a chimpanzee could pull your head off with its hand. Crazy strength on those things. Anyway, next question. What is more dangerous, MMA or boxing? How are we defining more dangerous? More dangerous to your brain? Well, in the sport of boxing, you are going to take more hits, you are going to receive more concussions, more brain damage, generally speaking, but that's not always true, depending on your skill level and your ability to avoid damage. There are certainly punch-drunk MMA fighters, too, who have had the misfortune of taking too many strikes to the head. Both sports are inherently dangerous and may result in serious injury or death. Why do people say MMA is not good for self-defense? Probably because they understand neither MMA nor self-defense. MMA is the polar opposite of self-defense. Self-defense is remove yourself from the danger. MMA is be the danger. How do I become an MMA fighter? You get out there and train, and then you go fight, preferably in that order and not the other way around. How is boxing different from MMA and Muay Thai? Okay, boxing is the sport of pugilism, meaning you punch, you wear boxing gloves, and you punch the other guy attempting to knock him out. You may win by knockout, technical knockout, or judge's decision. Amateur boxing fights last for 3 rounds. A professional boxing match lasts between 4 and 12 rounds in the modern era. The rules have changed substantially over the last 100 years, but yeah, that's basically it. Muay Thai, you may strike with any part of your body except for the head. Clinching is allowed. Dirty boxing or clinching, holding, and striking is also allowed. Sweeps and trips are also allowed. Wrestling or judo-style throws, as the Lumpini Stadium rule set says, are not allowed, even though sweeps and trips are part of wrestling and judo. It's funny that they worded it that way. Anyway, fights are won by knockout or by a judge's decision if all the rounds have expired and neither fighter has won. The scoring criteria in Muay Thai depends on which stadium you're fighting at. It varies. Some will favor the knees, some the kicks. If you're fighting outside of Thailand, they might score your boxing a little bit higher. In the sport of MMA, it's a hybrid sport, combining grappling and striking techniques. Fights are won by either knockout or technical knockout. Submission, that means one fighter gives up under threat of serious injury or death, or judge's decision if all the rounds have expired. MMA generally takes place in a cage, although it's sometimes in a boxing ring. Should I learn boxing or mixed martial arts? Yes. Yes, you should. Why are Chinese martial arts not used in MMA? Probably because that question is false and misleading, because they actually totally are. Chinese mixed martial artists often use Chinese martial arts in mixed martial arts. There are quite a few of them. How would an MMA fighter, I should go back and clarify that question a little bit. If all you know is one traditional martial art, let's say one traditional Chinese martial art like Bagua Zhang, and that's all you know, you're not going to do very well in mixed martial arts, because the sport of mixed martial arts is more than just that. If all you know is Wing Chun, Yong Chun, then you are going to be a fish out of water when it comes to MMA, because MMA is more than just that. Now, you can integrate single styles into MMA if you know how to box, if you know how to wrestle, if you know jiu-jitsu, if you understand kickboxing, clinch fighting, bridging the gap, etc. If you're good at all that stuff, you can make any stupid thing look awesome in MMA. How would an MMA fighter fare against a Spartan soldier in hand-to-hand combat? I don't know. I've never seen a Spartan soldier fight in hand-to-hand combat, and neither have you. Is it better to learn MMA or Krav Maga? MMA, of course, because Krav Maga sucks. How useful is MMA in a street fight? Don't get into street fights. Street fights are not useful at all, so anything you do in a street fight is not technically useful. Now, if you end up in a hand-to-hand combat situation with a single dude who describes himself as a street fighter, which generally means they don't know how to fight, you're probably going to do pretty well if you are an experienced fighter fighting some bum who doesn't know what he's doing. If by street fight you mean an aggravated assault where a bunch of dudes jump out with weapons and assault you by surprise and stab you and shoot you, then you're probably going to die. What is the difference between UFC and MMA? UFC is a sports league. MMA is what the sport is actually called. The sport of MMA is that hybrid sport of grappling and striking we were talking about before. The UFC is a sports league showcasing the sport of MMA, kind of like the NFL is a sports league that showcases American football, and so on. Who would win in a hand-to-hand combat situation between a Navy SEAL and an experienced MMA fighter? Well, that would depend if that Navy SEAL was also an experienced MMA fighter. There are a few of those. However, if we are discussing a Navy SEAL whose only hand-to-hand combat experience is what has been offered to him in the military, he is probably going to be at a loss against an experienced MMA fighter, because hand-to-hand combat is not the specialty of the Navy SEALs. Wars in the modern era are not won with hand-to-hand combat. In fact, wars in any era were never won with hand-to-hand combat. They used weapons and tactics and battle formations and all that stuff that makes winning fights a whole lot easier. How do eye irons work to reduce swelling from punches in MMA? Eye iron. Oh, this person means an end swell. An end swell is that metal thing that they put in ice, that they put on boxers' faces to make the swelling go down. It's called an end swell, not an eye iron, just so we're clear. I've never actually seen anyone use one of these in MMA. It may have happened, but it generally doesn't. Specifically because if you've got hematomas over your eyes to the point where your eyes are starting to close, generally the referee has waved that fight off already as a TKO. So that's more of a boxing thing, man. Why is boxing less popular than MMA? Probably because it isn't, and you have that backwards. As far as pure sales, pay-per-views, tickets sold, etc., boxing is still the king of combat sports. MMA is very popular, it's quickly growing, it's the fastest growing sport on the planet, but yeah, statistically speaking, you're wrong right there. Boxing, the numbers don't lie, sells more than mixed martial arts. Why is Wing Chun not used in MMA training? Well, I could cite a bunch of examples of MMA fighters who use Wing Chun techniques and Wing Chun training in their sport, but generally speaking, if you just train in Wing Chun, you will absolutely fail in mixed martial arts at any meaningful level of the sport, because Wing Chun is not that. It's something different. Can an MMA fighter really beat a Krav Maga master? Absolutely, especially if he calls himself a Krav Maga master. Anyone who calls themselves a master of Krav Maga, I guarantee, is a master of nothing. Next question. How well do you think Bruce Lee would have fared in MMA and the UFC? We've already answered this question. I love Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is an amazing martial arts actor, philosopher, teacher, etc. One of the most inspirational martial artists who ever lived, because his movies brought the idea of kung fu and martial arts to the common man and made us all want to get out there and train, and respect to the man for that. But with the skill set that he had back then, he would not have done well in the UFC at all. Why is Aikido not used in mixed martial arts? Well, we can point to a few examples of Aikido techniques being used in the sport of mixed martial arts, but generally speaking, Aikidoka practitioners of Aikido don't compete at all in anything because it's contrary to the philosophy of Aikido. How well can a professional MMA fighter handle a street fight? I think we've already answered this question. Skip. Why is BJJ so effective? Well, BJJ is effective at grappling because it's the sport of grappling. Why is grappling effective against people who don't know how to grapple? Because when you have a highly developed skill set that other people don't have, you are absolutely going to dominate them when you put the ball in your corner. What is MMA? MMA stands for Mixed Martial Arts. It is a hybrid combat sport. We've answered this question already. Next, who will win a fight between a boxer and an MMA fighter? Depends on who the boxer is, who the MMA fighter is. In most cases where professional boxers have attempted the sport of professional MMA, the boxers didn't do too well. There are a few exceptions to that norm. For example, when Ray Mercer fought former UFC champion Tim Sylvia, he knocked him out. In an interview after that fight, Ray Mercer, however, man, the man is humble, and I respect him a great deal because he was humble enough to say, look, if you can get that lucky shot, then you can knock him out. Because, you know, you have this highly developed skill set with your hands, but at the same time, if you give them an inch, they will take that mile, man, and you're not going to do so well. So it can go either way at a very high level. But generally speaking, if you have a highly skilled MMA fighter and a highly skilled boxer who doesn't know anything about grappling, there's a high chance that MMA fighter is going to take him down, ground and pound him, choke him out, etc. This happens a lot. Is capoeira useful in MMA? Look, once again, I love capoeira. If you know how to grapple, if you know how to strike, if you know how to fuse those two things together at a high level, you can make any stupid thing look awesome in MMA. I use a lot of capoeira techniques in mixed martial arts. I did not use a lot of capoeira techniques in mixed martial arts before I learned how to wrestle and how to do it at a high level. Once I understood wrestling, I understood how to use all the fancy spinning stuff in MMA because I was no longer afraid of being taken down. Where can I learn MMA in Bangalore? I have no idea. I've never been there. Good luck in your quest trying to find a gym. What are the top 10 fights in the history of MMA? Oh, man, that's highly debatable. I mean, we could talk about the most influential fights. For example, the fights of UFC 1 were probably the most influential in the sport of MMA because that grabbed everybody's attention and made us think, well, what is this thing? This is different. We got to get into this. We can talk about the fights that were the most interesting, and yeah, that's highly subjective, man. I have no idea. Too many to name. Is karate effective in MMA? Once again, if you don't know how to box, if you don't know how to wrestle, if you don't know jiu-jitsu, if you don't know how to clinch fight, if you don't know how to bridge the gap, then nothing is effective in MMA. Your karate is going to suck. If you know all that stuff, if you cross-train in all the fundamental skill sets of the sport of mixed martial arts, then you can make your karate look effective. If you're no longer afraid of people taking you down and outboxing you and clinching you to death and choking you out, etc., you can make your karate look effective in MMA. And this, I made a video a few years ago basically answering this question, and it's titled something like karate is not effective in MMA until you learn how to box. And this upset a lot of people. And they said, well, karate is punching and kicking. Punching is basically boxing. Well, no, it isn't. Boxing is the art of positioning yourself in a fight to land punches. And that's a skill set that a huge percentage of karate practitioners simply don't have. And a lot of angry people said, well, what about Lyoto Machida? And they gave a laundry list of other successful mixed martial artists who have a karate background or a karate black belt. And I pointed out, look, you just gave me a list of highly skilled, highly successful mixed martial artists who also train in karate. This is not a list of guys who got their black belt in karate and just jumped in the cage, man. It's a very different thing. Lyoto Machida, for example, probably the most famous karate practitioner the UFC ever had, was also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, cross-trained in boxing and wrestling and Muay Thai and sumo wrestling as well. A lot of people don't know that. The man got out there and trained. He cross-trained. He wasn't just a karate guy. How can I get really good at MMA? You get out there and train, man, and you do it consistently. Consistency is key. Do police fear arresting professional MMA fighters? Man, I hope not. I mean, there are cases of MMA fighters getting into legal trouble or getting arrested, etc. Man, Phil Baroni just recently got arrested down in Mexico for killing a woman. Man, that's a sad story, but man, I would hope with the majority of MMA fighters that those guys are knowing better than to get into legal trouble, man. Keep the violence in the cage. What is the best resource to learn MMA at home? Get yourself some training partners, get yourself a wrestling mat, get yourself enough space to train, and get out there and train. Who would win outside of an MMA ring or an octagon, an MMA fighter or a Shaolin monk? I asked this question to my friend Antonio Gracefo, Dr. Antonio Gracefo. We did a whole podcast about this. I clipped out the link, about a 15-minute discussion on this topic. Go check it out. He lived at the Shaolin Monastery for several years, across 2 different decades, trained with the monks extensively. Dr. Gracefo also has a number of MMA fights under his belt. He's got a doctorate's degree in Wushu from the Shanghai University of Sport. He's very knowledgeable about Chinese martial arts, about wrestling, about mixed martial arts, and of course, about the Shaolin monks and the Shaolin Temple. So I asked him, how would a Shaolin monk do in MMA? He said, without hesitation, they would get killed instantly. That's not what they train for. This made a lot of people upset. But that's not my answer. That's an answer from a man who has a lot more experience with this topic than I do with the Shaolin monks. Can I learn MMA at the age of 24? Of course you can. That's the perfect time to start training in combat sports if you haven't started training already. Man, that's like the time when your brain starts to become fully formed. I absolutely hate it when people say, I'm 14 years old. Is it too late for me to start training? Are you kidding me, man? Are you kidding me? If you're alive, if you're an able-bodied human being, it's not too late for you to start training. As far as if starting to compete, now generally speaking, if you're a senior citizen, it may not be a good idea to start competing in a full-contact combat sport like mixed martial arts. I've known senior citizens, on the other hand, who've competed at the Masters divisions of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's totally doable, but if you were taking full contact hits to the head, you might want to rethink that at an advanced age. 24 is not an advanced age. That's the perfect time to train, man. 24-year-olds thinking they're old, my goodness. Why is there so much disrespect for Bruce Lee in MMA? Newbie fighters claim that they'd floor, and in his prime Bruce Lee today, what's up with that? Well, newbie fighters claim all kinds of crazy things, but why is there disrespect for Bruce Lee and MMA? I think this question is coming from a guy who probably belongs to the Church of Jeet Kune Do and made some outlandish claims about Bruce Lee on the internet that probably weren't true. Like, Bruce Lee is a demigod, and with one finger he could blast you to the moon, or some nonsense like that. And then some one who probably trains in MMA or has a couple stripes and a white belt in BJJ probably said, "That's a load of crap. How dare you disrespect Bruce Lee?" That's generally how those conversations go. I know I've had a lot of them. Could an MMA fighter beat a Navy SEAL? And we've answered that one already. Apparently, a lot of people want to know, what are the best combinations of martial arts for MMA fighting? The best way to train for MMA fighting is not to take a combination of martial arts. You definitely should cross-train in some different things: boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. Those are all good single disciplines to cross-train in. But the best way to train for MMA is not to do a combination of different sports. It is to train specifically for the sport of mixed martial arts, because it is its own unique sport with its own unique set of rules and its own unique circumstances that you will never, ever address in those other sports. Is MMA a martial art? If not, why? No, MMA is not a martial art. It is not a style. MMA is a sport. It is a sport with a broad rule set that allows martial artists of different disciplines to compete against each other. Why is Taekwondo not liked by MMA fans? Probably because that's not true at all. Some MMA fans don't like Taekwondo for the same reason they don't like football or soccer or hockey or these other sports, because they're into MMA. And some MMA fans like different sports too, like Taekwondo and boxing and whatever. I am an MMA fan. I'm also a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo. So what are we going to do with that? People are different and they have their own unique likes. I'm imagining this question probably comes from a kid who trains in Taekwondo and loves Taekwondo and went on an internet forum and said, "I love Taekwondo." And some trolls in the comment section were probably like, "Taekwondo sucks and you'd get your butt kicked by an MMA fighter. Boo." And then he felt bad and went to Quora and wrote this question. How come MMA fighters never try to fight Aikido practitioners? Probably because MMA fighters are a little too merciful for that. It's bullying, man. It's picking on the weak, is what I'm saying. Aikido practitioners, largely due to their fighting philosophy, they don't fight, they don't compete. And if you don't compete, you don't spar, you're not going to understand fighting skills. And so it's just not going to happen. So why do MMA fighters never try to fight Aikido practitioners? I've seen some videos on the internet of Aikido practitioners attempting to fight or spar with MMA fighters. You can find those. Those exist. Why do you prefer boxing or MMA, and why? What do you prefer, boxing or MMA, and why? MMA, I prefer MMA because it's the sport that I prefer. It's like asking, which do you prefer, chocolate or vanilla? Well, I prefer vanilla because I prefer it. I could give you some reasons. Because the taste, and I could start describing the taste of vanilla or something like that, but, man. My mom preferred the taste of vanilla to chocolate. It was the only ice cream she would ever eat. Vanilla. That was it. Why do boxers make more money than MMA fighters? Boxers at the highest level make more money than MMA fighters at the highest level. At the entry level, combat sports athletes in general don't get paid very well. At the journeyman level, boxers and MMA fighters both don't get paid very well. So why do the boxers at the high level make more money than MMA fighters at the high level? Look, the guys making the big paychecks in boxing do this thing that MMA fighters don't do and largely can't do. They become the boxing promoter. The boxing promoter is the guy who takes the lion's share. If you look at Floyd Mayweather, for example, why is Floyd Mayweather making the most money? Why? Because he's also the promoter of the boxing events that he has competed in. That's why he gets the big paychecks. So boxers who are able to become the boxer/promoter, those are the guys who make the big bucks. Can a boxer beat an MMA fighter in a street fight? This is basically the same question: who wins, an MMA fighter or a boxer in an MMA fight? Look, It can happen, and it also can't happen. Could Mike Tyson in his prime beat an MMA champion in his weight class in an MMA match? I mean, look, just like Ray Mercer pointed out, if you get the timing just right and you get that lucky shot pretty quick, right off the bat in the first 30 seconds, yeah, you can do it. And if you're fighting a good grappler and you don't get off that lucky shot in the first 30 seconds, you don't time it well, then he's going to take you down and pound you. So if Mike Tyson fought in, let's say, 10 MMA matches, how many would he have scored that knockout in the first 30 seconds before the guy managed to take him down? Maybe some of them, but probably not the majority. What are the best MMA gyms in India? I have no idea. MMA is still fairly new in India. I don't know, man. I don't know. What is the age? What age is perfect to first start training in MMA? The age at which you are willing to work for it. I could say as soon as possible, but little kids are often not motivated to work, and they're often not motivated to be consistent. So I would much rather take someone who is older and willing to work, willing to put in the work, than someone who is young and lazy. Why do some MMA fighters, and not only MMA, have a fat belly? I thought each fighter should have a fit body to be better. Well, it's not the sport of bodybuilding. And there are fighters, some fighters who have a fat belly. Famously, Daniel Cormier didn't have the six-pack abs. He had a little extra something around the midsection. Why do we see this in MMA, in the heavyweight divisions especially? Well, it's because six-pack abs don't win fights. Aesthetics don't win fights. Being absolutely shredded doesn't win fights. And there's a difference between being strong and being aesthetic. You should know this if you ever watch a strongman event or a powerlifting event versus a bodybuilding event. Totally different physiques. And different physiques in different sports perform very differently. So, man, heavyweight fighters can often get away with a little extra something around the midsection. In the teeny tiny divisions, not so much, because they got to keep cutting weight to get smaller, to make the weight class. Why are deaths more common in boxing than in MMA? Well, I'll give you a couple simple reasons, largely because of the rule set. It's often said, well, boxers take more punches to the head. That's all the sport is punching each other. But it's more than that. So back in the 1930s, I don't remember the exact year, but it was specifically because of a fight between Jack Dempsey and his good friend, Gene Tunney. They were friends, but also professional rivals. At the behest of Jack Dempsey, a new rule was instituted into the sport of boxing, which was, if one fighter was knocked down, instead of standing over him until he could get up and you can knock him down again, which was the old rule in boxing, the standing fighter would have to retreat to a neutral corner, and the referee would give the down fighter a mandatory 8 count. He would count 8, and then if the down fighter was able to get up and say, I can continue, and hold his gloves up and look like he was okay, the fight would be allowed to continue. And you can be knocked down up to 3 times in a single round. And modern boxing can have up to 12 rounds per fight. Back in the 90s, it was like 15 rounds per fight. Before that, we had up to unlimited rounds per fight. And if you're getting knocked down, it's highly probable that you just got concussed. You can get concussed repeatedly in the sport of boxing and keep fighting. If you get knocked down in the sport of MMA to the point where you need 8 seconds to get back up, the fight's over. It's called a technical knockout. If you need any amount of time to show that you are intelligently defending yourself, the fight's over. It's a technical knockout. So MMA fighters get concussed a lot less. If they get concussed, it's once in the fight, not multiple times. In boxing, you can have multiple concussions in a single match. That's why we have more deaths. Which one is better for self-defense, Krav Maga or MMA? Neither. Self-defense is a legal term to justify violent action that would otherwise be illegal, and to justify that in a court of law. Krav Maga sucks, and people telling you, come to my Krav Maga school and I'll teach you to defend yourself against all these street thugs and whatever. They suck. I've met so many of these guys, and no matter how much they rant and they rave about their awesome system, they suck. I'm just going to put that out there. How long do MMA fights usually last? A professional fight is 3 5-minute rounds for a standard non-title fight. A title fight is 5 5-minute rounds. What is the perfect workout for a MMA fighter? I don't think there is a perfect workout, because there is no one single MMA fighter. Depending on your strategy, your skill, your strengths, your weaknesses, etc., that workout is going to change from fighter to fighter. Is Krav Maga so effective? If Krav Maga is so effective, why is it not featured in MMA fights? Because it's not effective. What works in MMA but doesn't work in a street fight? What works in MMA but doesn't work in a street fight? Nothing works in a street fight, because street fights are the most dysfunctional thing ever. But let's humor this for a moment. Let's just assume we're having a hand-to-hand mutual combat situation on the streets. Like literally on the streets. Let's assume no cars are going to drive by and run us over while we're fighting on the street, though. What happens? How is this different from MMA? So we don't have gloves. That's already a big issue. So the type of swarming, type of aggressive punching that you sometimes see in MMA, this would change. This would change. Because gloves allow a fighter to hit, gloves and wraps, allow a fighter to hit at a super physiological level. They allow you to punch significantly harder with less risk of injuring your hands. So you would have to dial back the punching a little bit, maybe a lot, depending on how experienced you were at bare hand fighting. I hesitate to say bare knuckle because there are all these bare knuckle boxing leagues where they still wrap the wrists and wrap the metacarpals but leave the knuckles exposed. That's a big difference between bare-handed fighting. Even with the wraps on the wrist, especially with the wraps on the wrist and the metacarpals, you can hit a whole lot harder without risk of injuring your hands than you can without. So that's the main thing. Let's see here. Oh man. Some people would like to point out, well, what about the street, the concrete? Because you wouldn't want to grapple on the ground. Look, if you are a superior grappler and if you're an MMA fighter against an unskilled street fighter, you're going to be the guy on top. The guy on the bottom is going to be the guy who doesn't know how to grapple. The guy who's going to be taking the damage from the street, from the concrete, is going to be the guy who doesn't know how to grapple. So will that make grappling less effective? No, that's going to make wrestling a whole lot more effective. Deadly, in fact. Man. So if you want to finish a street fight without killing your opponent, then maybe don't slam them on the pavement, because if we consider working in a street fight, not going to jail at the end, then yeah, you might want to keep that in mind. What is the difference between an amateur MMA fighter and a pro MMA fighter? The only consistent difference is that a professional MMA fighter gets paid to fight. An amateur MMA fighter does not get paid to fight. There are amateurs who are schmucks who just get off their couch and want to try it for the first time, one and done type of amateurs. There are high-level amateurs out there. Take, for example, shout out to Jordan. What's Jordan's last name? Jordan from Jordan teaches jiu-jitsu. I'm blank. Jordan Pressinger, I think it is. Anyway, he's a jiu-jitsu black belt and an amateur MMA champion. And even though MMA isn't the main focus of his channel, it's Brazilian jiu-jitsu, the guy is really good. He's got a very high fight IQ. I could see him, even with amateur status, beating a lot of professionals. So, again, he's a high-level amateur. He's at the high end, like champion level. You know, he could transition to professional MMA if he wanted to, and probably do that pretty easily. I don't know if he wants to. And we've got everything in between. You know, the guy who just gets up off the couch and has no training and doesn't know what the heck he's doing, and the high-level amateur who's ready to go pro. But the only real difference is that a pro MMA fighter The only real consistent difference, the pro MMA fighter gets paid. Amateur rules vary from place to place, from country to country, from state to state. Sometimes the rules are identical to the unified or the universal rules of mixed martial arts. Sometimes they are quite different or restrictive. Sometimes amateur fighters are required to wear shin guards or bigger gloves. Sometimes it's the same equipment. It's highly variable. Can you headbutt in MMA? No. Under current rules, under the UFC rules and also the universal rules of MMA, headbutts are not allowed. If you didn't know, there are two main rule sets for the sport of MMA. Unified rules, which is the rule set that the UFC uses, and the universal set of rules, which is the rule set that ONE FC uses, neither allow headbutts. In the original iteration of the UFC, headbutts were allowed up until the year 2000, when the unified rules were penned. If you're looking for a sport like MMA that allows headbutts, Combat Sambo allows headbutts. They do wear headgear, but they do allow headbutts. How hard do you have to work to become an MMA fighter? Well, you can not work at all and get into an MMA fight and say, hey, I'm an MMA fighter. But if you want to be good at it and have any consistent staying power in the sport, you got to work hard and consistent, obviously. How do boxers and MMA fighters take hits so well? They don't. If you are taking the hits, taking them, then you are getting hurt and you're probably getting knocked out. We often see superficial hits, hits that don't land flush, hits that land on the arms, hits that land on the elbows, hits that land to parts of the body that aren't really damaging, and they make a big sound sometimes, and we go, oh, ooh, ooh. And yeah, man, to take those kind of hits, position and proper breathing are key. Rolling with the punch, that means instead of standing there like a statue, rigid, moving with it, rolling with it, so the power dissipates through the body, out behind you, into the floor, etc. That goes a long way. But generally speaking, MMA fighters and boxers who are doing well are the ones who are not taking the hits. They're the ones who are slipping the punches, blocking the punches, evading the punches, rolling with the punches, etc. In MMA fighting, could women and men compete equally, assuming weight class limitations apply? So, nope. No. If we have a man and a woman and they're both in the same weight class, it's not going to be an evenly matched fight. Assuming they're both competent MMA fighters. If you have a highly skilled female fighter and some schmuck who doesn't know what the heck he's doing and he's not even an athlete, that highly skilled female MMA fighter, assuming they're in the same weight class, could easily dominate that schmuck who doesn't know what the heck he's doing. If you have a highly skilled male MMA fighter, a highly skilled female MMA fighter, they're in the same weight class, it's not going to be comparable. There's just too much of a strength differential. Are there MMA fighters that had died during the match? There have been a few recorded deaths in MMA, none in the UFC so far. I hope you understand the difference, because we already discussed that. Not too many, but it has happened. Which is more useful in a street fight, MMA or boxing? We already discussed that. Don't get into street fights. Why are kung fu fighters so bad in MMA? You've probably seen a bunch of these popular videos online about these schmucks who don't know how to fight and they're wearing like a kung fu outfit and they go get their butts kicked by Shu Xiaodong or something like that. It's not that Chinese martial arts are bad for mixed martial arts. There's a lot of great stuff in Chinese martial arts that you can integrate into mixed martial arts. But once again, if you are a single style type of traditional martial artist, you will not do well in mixed martial arts because you don't understand the sport. A lot of repeat questions here. Do boxers punch harder than MMA fighters? Some of them do, some of them don't. Can professional MMA fighters beat up 4 untrained teenagers? Yes, but that would be a crime. That would be multiple crimes. How do professional MMA fighters deal with pain? We cry silently on the inside. Why was the MMA fighter Ronda Rousey unbeatable and then all of a sudden she couldn't win a fight? Ronda fought a bunch of fighters who were not nearly as good at judo as she was. And then she fought, what's her name? Sarah McMahon, who was a very good wrestler, a former Olympian. And Ronda landed a knee to the midsection, ended that fight via TKO. And then Ronda fought Holly Holm. And that was a pretty compelling fight. That was a great fight, man. That was a lot of interesting back and forth. It was very compelling, very interesting. That fight could have gone either way. If they fought 10 times, could have gone either way for either fighter. And then she fought Amanda Nunes, who just murked her. And then she retired from professional mixed martial arts. So it's not that Ronda could no longer win fights. It's that, well, she chose to not compete anymore. And yeah, man, the sport evolved within her lifetime, within her career. So women's mixed martial arts, when Ronda started, was not very dynamic. It really wasn't. The talent pool was pretty shallow. And man, it was kind of like back in the day, at the beginning of mixed martial arts, a jiu-jitsu black belt, and if that's all he knew, could dominate in the sport of mixed martial arts. Or a good wrestler who had a marginal understanding of striking and a marginal understanding of jiu-jitsu could dominate in the sport of mixed martial arts. And that's not the case anymore. But women's MMA, back when Ronda started, was not nearly as developed as men's MMA. The talent pool simply wasn't there. Why don't MMA fighters punch with the heel of their hand more? Well, for the very simple reason, if your hands are wrapped up in a glove, you've got significantly more reach and more power, and this is just an objectively better weapon by every metric. Now, there are certain situations where a palm heel strike will come into play, and that's generally at very short range. Why don't we see it very much? Because it's not nearly as useful as you seem to think it is. Should MMA be an Olympic sport? No. Keep MMA out of the Olympics. I made a whole video about this. It's 30 minutes long. I got mad. I got passionate. I think I went on a rant about vegans too in that same video. I'm not sure why, but I did. Am I too old to have a career in MMA? Are you dead? No? Then you're not too old. Which combat sports currently generate more money? MMA, UFC, or boxing? Boxing, we've discussed that. Is MMA good for self-defense? You know what's good for self-defense? As far as the combative elements of self-defense, we're not talking about situational awareness, staying out of trouble, etc., but a fight breaks out. You're being attacked. What do you do, right? That's what everybody really wants to know when they say self-defense. What is good for self-defense? Have a weapon. Know how to use it. Be prepared to use it. Be prepared to live with the consequences of using it. Have multiple people on your side. Travel in groups. Have a friend. Have multiple friends. Because if one guy jumps out and he tries to attack two guys, guess who's going to win most of the time? The two guys, not the one. And be the best athlete that you can. Why? Ever heard people say, well, just run away. What if you're not good at running? Well, get good at running. Be an athlete. Is MMA good for building muscle? If you're a complete wimp and you have no muscle on your body, doing any kind of sport will improve that. But MMA is not strength training. MMA is not bodybuilding. Every MMA fighter should cross-train in strength training. They should try to be the best athlete that they can be, but yeah, the technique that you will use to win MMA fights is not going to increase the musculature on your body. In fact, often when strength athletes try to transition to combat sports, they end up losing a lot of mass because they're no longer focused on maintaining and building body mass. How often should I train to fight in amateur kickboxing, boxing, or MMA? Well, if you want to be good at it, A simple formula, 6 days on, 1 day off. Be consistent. You can do 1 a day, you can do 2 a days. Anything more than 2 a days, unless you're doing short 90-minute sessions for 3 a days, it's probably overkill. What is the difference between MMA and boxing? We already discussed this. Would Floyd Mayweather ever agree to fight Conor McGregor with MMA rules? Probably not. Can I start training MMA at 21? Oh, these geriatric 21-year-olds, man. Of course you can. Can I start MMA at 17 and go pro? I'm afraid not. You're too old. I'm just kidding. Of course you can. How much time does it take to become an MMA fighter? As soon as you sign up for an MMA fight and walk in the cage, you're an MMA fighter. How long does it take to become a good one? A long time. A guy wants to fight me tomorrow who has a black belt in Taekwondo with MMA and kickboxing mixed in. What should I do besides tell the teacher, okay, we got a kid at school, a guy wants to fight him. Well, do you want to fight him? If you don't, then don't fight him. And I'm going to tell you a story. All right, for all you kids out there who are in school, grade school, junior high, high school, etc., and you got people picking on you, wanting to pick fights with you. Look, so there was this bully at school and he used to pick on me all the time. And one day I got sick of it. So I challenged him to a fight. I stood up in the middle of class and loudly I said, after school, in the park, be there. And he said, oh yeah, we're going to fight. Okay, yeah. So after lunch, I'm walking around the side of the school outside, and the school bully and about 30 of his friends surround me and proceed to beat the living crap out of me in a 30-against-1 altercation. That wasn't fun. I got hurt pretty bad. So, fighting for pride. It's dumb. If you're not getting paid for it, why the heck would you get in a fight? What is the scope of MMA in India? I don't know. I don't know. What are some training methods for MMA? Okay. Some training methods for MMA. If you want to know, go check out the technique playlist on my channel. I have hundreds. I've got over 400 technique videos on my channel so far. I have more technique videos on my channel than most technique channels have total videos. And that's not even what I focus mostly on my channel, but check out my technique videos. I'll give you hundreds of training methods for MMA. Is 16 to 17 a good age to start training MMA? Yes. How long would it take for me to become an official MMA fighter? We've answered that. Do trans women have unfair advantages in women's MMA? Some of them do. Yeah, some of them do. And some of them don't, although the ones that don't probably aren't the ones who are signing up to fight in MMA. I know a few trans women who have zero interest in sports or competing in MMA, and they would absolutely get their butts kicked in the sport of MMA because they have no skill and no athleticism, etc. But if you took a highly athletic biological man who becomes a trans woman and put him in the sport of MMA against women, he's probably going to have a substantial advantage. And some sports leagues, including the Olympics now, don't require any physiological changes whatsoever to be considered a trans woman. So a biological man with intact genitals, intact functioning testes, producing testosterone, with no surgery, no hormone replacement, etc., can compete as a woman in the Olympics right now, unless that has been changed recently. And in some MMA leagues, this is also the case. I could say, hey, I identify now as a woman. I'm going to compete in the women's division. I'm technically a trans woman now. Would I have advantages over women in my weight class? Heck yes, I would. Would that be fair? No. Is that the case with most trans women? I don't believe so. So, yeah, there's a lot of nuance in that question. I didn't give you a lot of nuance in that answer. Is BJJ obsolete now that MMA fighters have mostly learned how to counter it? Do you know why? Because those MMA fighters train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If you want to know how to counter a move, you learn that move. You don't learn some other system. You know all those ridiculous Wing Chun videos that came out in the late 90s about how to do anti-grappling techniques and whatnot, and they taught some silly nonsense. Anti-grappling is grappling. If you want to learn how to stop a wrestler, you have to learn how to wrestle. If you want to learn how to stop the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy from submitting you, learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If you want to learn how to counter the boxer, learn boxing. That's how it works. Is judo inadequate for the MMA? Yes, the judo is inadequate for the MMA. What MMA fighters have the most aggressive fighting style? Oh, okay. So we're asking for specific MMA fighters. Who's got an aggressive fighting style? Well, a lot of them do. If you look at Khabib, he had a very aggressive fighting style. I liked Khabib's fighting style, specifically because he was very aggressive in asserting his will and asserting his game plan. Yeah, man. Generally, we're not going to see counter-punchers on a list like this. Conor McGregor, in spite of being very successful in the sport of MMA, we probably wouldn't put him in the list of the most aggressive fighters because he was a counter-puncher. He waited for the aggressive guy to make the first move so he could counter-strike. Don't want to dwell on that too long. How can I become an MMA fighter in India? There's a lot of interest in India in MMA. I think there's more interest in MMA in India right now than there are people training in MMA in India. Man, I'll give you some pointers. So I moved to China about 15 years ago, and MMA was kind of non-existent here. I say non-existent. There was a little bit going on. But not much. You could count the guys who knew what MMA stood for on one hand, basically. And it wasn't a very developed sport here. Most people didn't know what it was. There were very, very few places to train and really nowhere to train at a high level. So instead of just curling up in a ball and saying, boo-hoo, there's nothing to do, you know what I did? I helped pioneer the sport here. I helped to pioneer the sport of mixed martial arts here. I opened up an MMA gym here. I opened up my first MMA gym in the United States. I started fighting in the United States. I brought that experience and that expertise with me. I started coaching in the United States as well, and I started doing the same thing here in China. And the sport has evolved. The sport has changed. The sport has advanced here in the People's Republic, man. You could help to do the same thing in India, if that's what you really want to do. Are you fond of MMA? Yes. Why is a real boxer able to outclass a fighter like Conor McGregor? Is boxing more highly skilled compared to MMA? Okay, you're probably referring to Conor McGregor losing a boxing match against Floyd Mayweather. Okay, Floyd Mayweather is clearly a more experienced boxer than Conor McGregor. That's why he's able to beat him. Experience, man. Experience. Why is Bruce Lee considered the godfather of MMA? Because Dana White said so. Because in a marketing campaign to get martial arts nerds, especially traditional martial arts nerds, to start liking and watching the UFC and buying their products and buying their pay-per-views, which is something they largely didn't do, Dana White did some collaborations with Shannon Lee, the daughter of Bruce Lee, and the owner of a large portion of his estate. Maybe the whole thing. I don't know about the legality of it. Anyway, they did some collaborations, and Dana White started making all these announcements, calling Bruce Lee the father, not the godfather, but the father of MMA, and saying, yeah, if it wasn't for Bruce Lee, we wouldn't have the UFC. We love Bruce Lee so much. We owe so much to Bruce Lee. And he started and perpetuated this narrative. Now, all of these traditional martial artists are repeating what Dana White said. All these guys who hate Dana White's guts are repeating his words, not even knowing that Dana White is the one who started this game of telephone. So that's why. That is why those specific words exist today, man. What are you not allowed to do in mixed martial arts? No grabbing the fence. No holding your opponent's shorts. No timidity. No running away. No throwing in the towel. No striking the back of the head, the back of the neck, or the spine. No strikes to the groin. No eye gouging. No fish hooking. That's inserting fingers into the mouth and trying to rip the flesh of the face. No inserting fingers into any bodily orifice, including a cut. What else? No scratching. What are you not allowed to do in the... what else? Did I mention no inserting your fingers into the straps of your opponent's gloves to try to gain an advantage? No stalling. No 12 to 6 elbows. Man, that's a silly rule, but it is. You may not bring an elbow in this fashion from directly up to directly down. An elbow at any other angle or with an arc to it is perfectly fine. No slamming your opponent on their head. No spiking. Not slamming, but no spiking your opponent on their head. That specifically refers to a pile driver. A lot of people are confused about that. I made a couple of videos explaining that in detail, including a short, it's 1 minute long, shows all the legal ways to throw your opponent on their head that are not actually spiking. Can I start MMA training at 15? No, I'm sorry, man, too late for you. Just kidding, yes. And then another one about Navy SEALs is Krav Maga. Yeah, we're getting a lot of repeat questions here. So that's a pretty good indicator that it is time to move on. All right, folks, thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.